Hello, dude and dudettes, it's me, E.H. Ivins, and this is another edition of The Radical Reset. Today, let's start our discussion with Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand was a Russian immigrant who came to the United States at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century after the Russian Revolution and became a radical capitalist. Now, she began as a screenwriter in Hollywood, where she was very successful, which is remarkable, given that Russian was her first language, not English. Later, she penned, and I am condensing a great life into a very small bit, so I want you to do your own research on this. But later she penned what is now the second best-selling book in history, Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged changed my life. Atlas Shrugged is the most predictive book in the history of American English language literature. I won't get into the story of it, you can read it yourself, but it is a direct parallel in so many ways of what is going on today. By the way, don't watch the shitty movie they made on Netflix. Don't read the fucking book. Now, mind you, it's over 1,000 pages long and it is a long read, but to this day, it came out in 1957, it still sells over 100,000 copies a year, second only to the Bible, as I said, because it is unbelievably, uncannily on target of what's going on. It's basically the story of a state that takes over a free market economy and destroys the country as a result. In the end, reaching out for help from the hero of the book, who is John Galt. And anyway, you'll read it, you'll find out if you haven't read it already. But Ayn Rand also founded both libertarianism and objectivism. I bring that up because objectivism is a school of philosophy that says there's an objective truth that stands separate and apart from the current political mishmash of what goes on. And this central truth is recognizable to anybody who looks for it and is how you should live your life. And basically it comes down to this: act in your own self-interest and believe in capitalism, okay? And use your reason in doing that. In other words, instead of doing so-called altruistic things, volunteering your time and pretending to be a good person and posing and everything else like so many celebrities do, yada, 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 and so many of the protesters and, you know, the Black Lives Matter people now, things like that, and it's just the movement of the moment, you know, act in your own self-interest, and by acting in your own self-interest, you create more good to the public than otherwise. In other words, to use the very dramatic example, Mother Teresa founded a hospice in the middle of the worst slum in the world, and when she died after doing it for decades, she left the worst slum in the world, and, you know, she improved nothing. Meanwhile, Bill Gates, who gets reviled, I see it constantly on the internet, created thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs and opportunity, improvement of life in the world, all by acting in his own self-interest. Now, today he gives away lots of money. He's doing both, and he has every right to do it because it's his personal choice, and that's the point. No one is making Bill Gates be the huge philanthropist that he is. He acts in his own self-interest. He's a very Ayn Randian figure. Okay, now having said that, at least theoretically, he probably doesn't agree with everything, but no one has to agree with everything. Now, I bring all this up, an objective reality, an objective truth, because we're living in a time where truth is being hammered to death because no one's educating anybody about anything. And I wanted to cover briefly, very briefly, 4 figures in American history who are getting a bum rap right now, whose statues are being pulled down and are being defaced and are being smeared by the woke culture of the present that are ignoring the objective reality. So I thought I'd spend a little time today on a little education. And I want to start with Christopher Columbus. Now, Columbus, Ohio, has recently undertaken a major movement. There's a petition circulating in Columbus, Ohio right now. I'm not making this up, I shit you not, to change the name of the town to Flavortown, which evidently is a nod to the fact that they make a lot of flavoring for various foods in Columbus, Ohio, from Columbus, who they now view as a racist and horrible figure, which is just simply not true. The true Christopher Columbus, we're never going to really know, but the true Christopher Columbus, first of all, you're going to find this hard to believe. There's a very good chance that while he was Italian, he was also a Jew, and was a secret Jew. In those days called a Murano, which actually means pig. But at the time, you have to remember that Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand were carrying out the Spanish Inquisition, and the Grand Inquisitor de Torquemada was slaughtering Jews by the thousands. And there is by the way, this comes from his diaries and things that he wrote, things that he said, a strong inclination. This man was secretly a Jew trying to find a place. Actually, what his real mission was to find some place to get the Jews the fuck out of Spain and away from the Inquisition. But we're never going to know if that's true or not, and I bring that up as a digression. The point is, he was not a slaver. He did not introduce slavery. Has been around, you know, since men have been enslaving each other for centuries. You know, the enslavement of black people by white people was just the last, not even the last, because slavery exists today. It was an iteration of something that had been going on since, you know, before the Romans, before the Greeks, before the Mesopotamians, there have been slaves. I'm not this is not an excuse for slavery. It's to understand the context of the times it was in, because we never think about context. Christopher Columbus lived in a time where slavery existed, but he was not the purveyor of slavery in the New World. That's bullshit. It's all just bullshit. In fact, he was, if anything, an enlightened government. He was a shitty explorer. A lot of people believe the myth that everyone thought the world was flat and he thought the world was round and he was sailing to find the shortest route to the Indies. Well, the fact of the matter is everybody knew the world was round in those days. That was not the big secret. The big secret was that Columbus was wrong. Columbus thought the world was smaller than it is. He didn't think it was a big world. He thought it was a small world. And if he sailed west, he'd get to the Indies. He didn't realize there's this huge landmass called the Americas in between. And I understand that the Vikings under Leif Erikson, and I understand that the Polynesians, you know, as proved by Thor Heyerdahl and the sailing of the rod, came to the New World long before Christopher Columbus. But it was Columbus that brought Europe to the New World, and the world as we know it wouldn't exist today, and the United States wouldn't exist today if it were not for Christopher Columbus. He was a great man. He took enormous risk. He risked his own life. He was in context of the time, benevolent governor of the New World for the time that he was in control, as assigned by the Spanish, and possibly the greatest man of the millennia. If you think about the effects of what he did on the world in discovering, when I say discovering, obviously not for the first time, but bringing European colonialization to the New World, he changed history. Well, the American Constitution wouldn't have happened, the greatest document ever written by mankind in protection of people's rights in the history of the world. And it's all comes back to the actions of Christopher Columbus. So tearing down his statue and changing the name of a town, if that's what makes you feel better, Columbus, Ohio, you go right ahead and do it, but you're fucking idiots for it, you know? You want to call your city Flavor Town? Party on, but you're stupid. No, not everybody in Columbus is stupid. Columbus is a lovely town, I'm sure. I'm just saying the people... Our educational system is so shitty, and we've done such a terrible job educating people, and a politically correct and woke culture is so destructive of great people that I'm left to talk about things like this. Okay, next on the list is George Washington. Yes, they're defacing George Washington's statue. They're calling him a slave owner and blah, 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 and he was. There's no doubt about it. But we forget that, again, the context of the times. George Washington owned slaves, and George Washington didn't like slavery, by the way. That's a historic fact, and he wanted to free his slaves, but he died before he did it. Now, he died of constipation. He was basically bled to death by quack doctors who believed bullshit theories of medicine, and he died at 62 when he could have lived to be in his 80s, who only knows. But he literally died of being bled to death during constipation, and he didn't expect to die. And since he didn't expect to die, he didn't free his slaves. And since he didn't free his slaves, he was in fact a slaver at the time of his death. And of course, to the woke, this makes him evil. But consider, guys, that there would be no America, and again, no American Constitution, which guarantees the rights of all human beings, and has since evolved in the popular meaning to understand all human beings, and is a remarkable document. And none of this would have happened without George Washington, who, by the way, would have been executed by hanging had he been caught for doing what he did and leading the colonial armies. The man was brave. He was, in many ways, similar to Martin Luther King. One of the things that makes Martin Luther King great is he knew he was a dead man walking. I mean, he's out there in his early 30s leading nonviolent marches in the Deep South during Jim Crow. Of course, I mean, it was... When I heard that Martin Luther King had been assassinated when I was a kid, I wasn't really surprised by it. George Washington, he could have easily lost the revolution, and had they lost, he would have been hung, and he would have lost everything. And for that alone, and add to that after the revolution was over, and after he was the most popular man in America, and hailed even in that time as the father of our country, and made president, not by direct popular election, but by the Congress at that time, and by the Electoral College, and became president, he only served 2 terms and refused to become king, which is greatness, because he could have been king. He was that popular. He could have set up the Washingtonian dynasty, which sounds stupid now, but it would have held, okay, because we came from the British tradition of like the Windsors today, or, you know, the last name of Queen Elizabeth is Windsor. I mean, that's just their last name, is the Windsors. Well, we could have had the Washingtons, but we don't, because George Washington was a great man who walked away from power. It takes tremendous fortitude to walk away from power. And for that alone, and the tradition that he set, and serving only 2 terms as president until FDR fucked that up. Remember, there was no amendment restricting the terms of presidents when George Washington served. And every president until FDR followed his lead by never serving more than 2 terms. That was all George Washington, a great man. We should not be tearing down his statues in the present. Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so let's concede that Thomas Jefferson was having sex with Sally Hemings and having babies, and there are black people today who have been genetically, with beyond a shadow of a doubt, traced back to Thomas Jefferson, which I'm not sure what that says, other than Thomas Jefferson was a man who liked to get laid, and Sally Hemings was a woman who was attractive. And, you know, we can get into a discussion. She was a house slave in his house, and did he force her to have sex? But it was a long relationship. They had more than one child. This went on for decades. So I choose to believe, in the context of the times, that he actually cared for Sally Hemings, but although couldn't publicly in the context of the times. Remember, he never remarried. He wasn't cheating on his wife by having sex with Sally Hemings. His wife had long since died. He was having a relationship with a woman who he cared for and couldn't make it public in the time. And he penned the Declaration of Independence. He was a major contributor to the Constitution. He was a great American in every way. And he personally knew slavery was a bad thing. But again, in the context of his times, he was imperfect. Oh my God, he was imperfect. We should tear down his statue because he wasn't perfect. I dare you to find anyone. Look, again, let's go forward to Martin Luther King, a great man, but absolutely plagiarized a paper in getting his master's degree years ago. Okay, so did he plagiarize? Yeah. Does that reduce his greatness? No. Did Martin Luther King whore around on what's her name, on his wife? What was her name? Coretta. Did he cheat on? Oh yeah. Like a fucking maniac. Martin Luther King was a bunny rabbit. But if I live with his stress, I think I'd be looking for an outlet too. I'm not making an excuse for adultery. I'm saying that great men don't shit marble, and Thomas Jefferson didn't either. But he was no less a great man in the context of his times. And slavery is gone, but what he left behind, and the documents he left behind, and the infrastructure for the greatest humanistic state in history he left behind, deserves statues. Wake the fuck up, woke. Jesus Christ. And last but not least, and I saved this guy for last in this discussion because I can't believe they're tearing down his statue, Ulysses S. Grant. Okay, Ulysses Grant was the greatest general in American history. Now, after the Civil War was over, the apologists for the South rewrote history in a lot of ways, or tried to, and that's what a lot of these Confederate statues are that are all over the country that are being pulled down. And I have to be honest with you, I kind of agree with taking down most of the Confederate statues because they weren't put up at the time. These men were traitors. The Confederates were traitors to the country. That's all there is to it. And Robert E. Lee was not the great man he was painted to be. That's all revisionist history. The truth is, although U.S. Grant gets the reputation of being a butcher, that's what the Southerners sewed into this rewrite of history. In fact, Robert E. Lee lost far more men as a percentage of the men he commanded. In other words, his death rates were much higher than U.S. Grant's, who protected his men. U.S. Grant was a great general. I mean, if you think Robert E. Lee was a great general, ask yourself, what the fuck was he thinking about charging the center of the Union line at Gettysburg uphill with no intelligence to understand what the hell he was facing? And the answer was, he was arrogant. And he did something incredibly stupid that cost thousands and thousands of lives, something that U.S. Grant never did. Plus, U.S. Grant then became the President of the United States for 2 terms after Andrew Johnson fucked it up, and presided over Reconstruction and the reunification of the nation, and was a benign president. There was some scandal in his administration, but he was never tainted by it. It was just people around him. And he was actually a very able and open president who treated both Native American tribes, Black Americans equally well, and was beyond a shadow of a doubt one of the great men in history, and very anti-slavery. There's a myth that goes around that he was a slave owner. There were people in his wife's family that owned slaves, but not him. He was adamantly, it sickened him. It sickened him. Slavery sickened him. He was a very unassuming, intelligent, genial, engaged, brilliant commander who deserves all the accolades we could possibly give him. He's underrated as an American, if anything, and tearing down his statue is a disgrace. But this is what comes from shitty public education influenced by the woke. I mean, let's take the example today of Paul Krugman. Now, Paul Krugman is an economist on the left, and I'm not changing the subject, but he's one of the leaders, if not the leader, of the woke modern monetary theory movement. So on one hand, he believes that we can print money as much as we want, since the dollar is the reserved currency of the world, in order to support all of these socialist social programs, which he's strongly in favor of, and he's a proponent of shutting up anyone who disagrees with him. As we speak, he's going after a University of Chicago professor named Harold Uhlig. And what did Harold Uhlig did that was so terrible that now Paul Krugman is after him and trying to get his job taken away at the University of Chicago? He dared say, ready for this, that defunding police was a stupid idea as a result of the protests that are going on. And it is a stupid idea. Look, Mayor de Blasio just cut $1 billion out of the police's budget, which is about 20% of its budget in New York City, at a time when crime is up 21% since he took office. Now, does that sound smart to you? Now look, let me stop here for a moment and say something very, very clear. I am no great lover of police. I went to prison, for Christ's sake. And when I was in prison, I learned what it was like to be on the receiving end of, if not police brutality, certainly police arrogance, and the behavior of people in the context of when they have a little too much power and too little sense. And I'm all about protecting the rights of the individual. I'm a strong proponent of Miranda rights. I'm a strong proponent in the right to a fair trial. I'm a strong proponent of being represented and never speaking to police without a lawyer present. Yada yada yada. As a former convict, I know what it is to be abused. I know there are people in prison that shouldn't be there, particularly drug crimes, which to me are a health problem, not a criminal problem, but I don't want to get into that discussion today. But having said all of that, defunding police without thinking it through. You know, I did a podcast, it was 2 or 3 podcasts ago, where I went through my 7-step solution for what to do about the police. None of it involved defunding them, okay? Defunding police, it's a popular thing to say, and people like Paul Krugman advocate it, but it's stupid. Stupid. And going after, shutting up the people that are exercising an objective reality, back to Ayn Rand, who are speaking objective reality. All Professor Uhlig said is, before we act, let's think this through. Defunding police is probably not the answer. Reforming police is the answer. But see, reformation requires a long effort of steady, what's the word I'm looking for? Steady planning, implementation, belief, follow through that these woke protesters don't have. They just want to go out, scream and yell, tear down a couple of statues, and rip up the fucking country. And I know that I'm caricaturizing these people, but this is the time in which we live. Look, we need to teach our country about history. We need to teach our country about itself. We need to teach our country about its heroes. We need to not destroy our heroes. We need to celebrate our heroes. We need to celebrate U.S. Grant. We need to celebrate George Washington. We need to celebrate Thomas Jefferson. And we need to see them as people, to understand that they shit, not marble. You know, like I said, Martin Luther King was fucking around in Coretta, and Thomas Jefferson was fucking Sally Hemings, and none of that has anything to do with their greatness. It has to do with their humanity. And, you know, there are no perfect people. Not even if Jesus is real, which I doubt. I don't think Jesus is real. I think that that's a construct. And I know I've just offended everybody watching this by saying that, but that's another discussion. I'm simply not going to go there. But if you want to, oops, there was me shaking. I do it in every fucking episode. I shake the camera at least once. If you want to learn a lot about the historicity of the historical Jesus. There's some excellent books. One is The Historical Jesus, written by Richard Carrier, that you should read. Richard Carrier, like Carrier air conditioners. And of course there's the writings of Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, etc., and other famous atheists, Sam Harris. But so I'm not going to go there today. And but here's the thing. The point is, life is just not so simple. Life is not so simple that you can paint everyone as a hero or a villain, and anyone that disagrees with you must be a villain, and anyone that agrees with you is a hero. In Antipolitism, in the system that I'm proposing, we would have all these exact same arguments, but without parties, money, or special interests. So imagine that we sat down and talked about what statues ought to come down in America today as anti-politists. In an anti-politist legislature, in an anti-politist Congress, in other words, where we all sat down and we discussed what is the proper course of action. And imagine this, both not just the Congress of the United States, but your state legislatures as well. And have a discussion. You know, in the end, we would probably say things like, you know what, the Confederate statues, naming military bases after traitors is not really a good thing. Probably renaming all of those is and I know that I've just offended, and I'm from the South, although I'm from, you know, the South-ish. I'm from Miami Beach, which is kind of like Brooklyn stuck on the ass end of Florida, but anyway. It's not the real South. I wish I could say it was the real South, but when I was a boy, I drove through the real South, and I drove through Jim Crow South, and I saw the whites-only fountains, and I saw the whites-only restrooms, and I went into restaurants with my parents where black people couldn't sit in the same area we could, and I saw black people have to get in the back of the bus when I would be driven to school as a little boy, and so on and so forth, on public buses, by the way, not on school buses. I don't remember that the school buses were I don't think they were segregated. But anyway, to make a long story short, I've seen it, and I've lived it, and I've been involved in it, and in prison, God knows, it's like the Jim Crow South. But the point of the matter is, everything can be reasoned and everything can be compromised, and intelligent people can talk to each other if they take the time to talk with each other, not at each other, and if they recognize objective truths. Like, for example, anything you subsidize, you get more of. So if you subsidize laziness through the welfare state, you get more laziness. If you subsidize poor behavior through AFDC, like single parenthood, you get more single parenthood. And then when bad things come, you can't start blaming, people that have been doing things right for what you did wrong, which is where we are today. And we need to change that. And that's where I'm going to leave this discussion today. Now, I want you to pick up a copy of A Radical Reset. I know I say this in every podcast, but you need to read the book. You need to understand what's going on, and it's free. It's a free download if you're a Prime member on Amazon, and almost nobody is the Prime member on Amazon. And if you're not, or if you're an old-fashioned type, pick up the paperback, pay a few bucks for it. It's not going to break the bank, and read the book, okay? Read the book. Read the Manifesto of Antipolitism, A Radical Reset. Then, click on the subscribe button, click on the notification buttons, and join the discussion. Join us at antipolitism.org. Join us in our movement. We're the only hope. We can't rely on the moral relativism of socialists because there is no morality to socialism. It's basically taking back to the objectivism of Ayn Rand. Capitalism is the most moral system because it's based on voluntarism. Everything that's done in a capitalist system, and we do not live in a capitalist system, my friends. We live in a crapitalist system full of special interests that fuck it up in politics. That's the whole point of anti-politism. But if we lived in a capitalist system and there was no special welfare for corporations any more than there was special welfare for individuals, everybody would be acting in a capitalist system based on what they voluntarily want to do. That's all capitalism is the voluntary set of transactions between people to buy and sell what they need at any given moment in time, without any interference, without any central regulation, without, or very, very little. Let me say that some regulation is probably necessary. I'm not an anarchist, but very, very little. Certainly not the mega state that's printing up money out of nowhere that's going to destroy us all today. So join the movement. Read your history. Don't buy into bullshit. Understand, and most of all, the last piece of advice, besides reading A Radical Reset, is read Atlas Shrugged. It'll change your world. Read about Ayn Rand. Check out objectivism. Learn there is an objective truth. There is a natural truth. Everything isn't just the way the modern world wants it to be. Some things are true whether you like it or not. That's the thing about truth. It's an inconvenient thing because it's true. Truth is true. And I know what's the word I'm looking for? That's just so simplistic that it almost seems moronic that I bring it up, but we just say things that we know aren't true. I wonder, sometimes I wonder if people on the left say the shit they say and then go home and go, God, I can't believe I said that shit in public. And I wonder if they're so blind by the pursuit of power that they're willing to say anything thinking that once I get in power, I'll do the right thing, which of course is just how people justify it. That's how I justified bad things and ended up in prison. I told myself in the end I'd make it all right, and I didn't. And I ended up where I ended up. And I think in a very grand scale, that's what our Congress is doing today. They're doing a lot of immoral shit, and they're piling up piles and piles of fiat currency that's going to come back to haunt us and destroy our country, all because no one takes the time to understand objective reality and objectivism. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me today. And until next time, this is E.H. Ivins, signing off.